Take nothing in life for granted. It can all change in an instant. That is the lesson our young family learned on a beautiful spring day in April. It all started when the apartment building, our home for 5 years, was taken down by smoke and flame. It is a scenario that replays itself over and over again with families rich and poor, with devastating effects on the minds of the victims. I was never fully aware of the tragedy a house fire creates until the day I experienced it firsthand.
When I first saw this guitar, I was shocked. It belonged to a dear friend and neighbor of mine who went through this horrific fire with her family in 1990. She wrote this story. She asked me what I could do to make it playable again. To be honest, I had no idea. It would be unlike anything I've ever done before or ever seen done by anyone else. She let me bring it home, where it sat on a stand for about a year. Since it was so closely connected to this story, and also one of the very few things that she was able to salvage, I wanted to be sensitive to what it represented. The guitar is a Yamaha G235, a mid-level, decent guitar that can be bought for about $300 or so in good condition. But the damage to this guitar is extensive. Most obvious is the huge gaping hole in the top and side. There are spots on the top and sides that are also singed badly. The binding around the entire top is almost gone. We'll need to replace that. The binding on both sides of the neck is badly damaged or missing. We'll replace that as well. A fan brace is badly charred and needs replacement. There's a puncture on the upper side. The tuner barrels and knobs are melted, as well as the plastic nut, and the faceplate is badly charred, chipped, and loose. The frets, fingerboard, and neck angle look pretty good, so it's possible to get it playing to factory spec, or even better. After much contemplation, I finally came up with a plan that I think will honor the memory of that horrible fire and transform this poor guitar back into a playable instrument and one-of-a-kind symbol of hope and recovery from a very traumatic event. So grab a cup of tea, some popcorn, and settle in for Life from the Ashes, a family's journey from tragedy.
On this perfectly stunning spring Saturday, I had been waiting for the landlord to come collect rent. My son, then age 11, was playing out in the backyard with some local kids who had stopped by. Funny, I thought. Those kids didn't look familiar. Shortly afterwards, I had discovered that my son had gotten into some personal belongings that were kept in our bedroom, a place that he was not allowed. And feeling that that deed should not go unpunished, I called him back into the house and sent him to his room. After a brief moment of argument, I went back to my household chores. My husband, who worked third shift, settled down to sleep in the front bedroom. My daughter was in her room, as usual, with her radio on, doing some writing. Except for the brief interruption of my son's punishment, it was an otherwise perfect weekend day.
My goal with this repair is not to restore it to its factory condition, rather restore it as a functioning instrument and preserve the damage as opposed to make it disappear. There are some aspects of the damage that I have no choice but to replace, such as the binding. The tuners are melted, but I think I can get them back into functioning condition by replacing some of the parts.
There was a knock at the door, and when I answered it, 2 young boys that had been my son's playmates were standing there. They were very clean, dressed quite well for a lower-income neighborhood, indicating to me that they were not from the local area. Chris had earlier told me they were his classmates. "Can Chris come out and play?" they asked. "No, he has to stay in now." When they asked why, I made short work of the conversation by saying he was grounded. I suggested they go back out and play. Something should have clicked in my head just then as the boys looked quizzically at me, as if something left unsaid. Maybe they were trying to figure it out, as if I knew they were playing with matches outside. Then finally they decided they were not going to get any more information, and they left.
Surprisingly, the frets aren't in that bad shape, but I will level them, clean them up. The binding's made out of walnut. However, to match the rest of the instrument, I'm going to darken it up with a little bit of stain.
I had decided to take a trip to the ocean that day, so after my business with the landlord was done, I packed up the car and called my kids to get in. Chris asked if he could stay home. It was a long trip to the beach at that time, and he never did well on long trips. But I insisted. His dad was fast asleep, and so the trip to the ocean was wonderful. The spring sun was warm and enjoyable after a long, cold winter. We were all excited by our finds as we combed the beach looking for shells and sand dollars. Late in the afternoon, we started back. As we neared home, I could smell something pungent in the air and saw roadblocks on the road where we lived. As I parked the car, I could see the tongues of flame billowing smoke and so many fire trucks in front of our building. The 3 of us made our way through the crowd, which had assembled to watch the possessions of our entire lives go up in smoke. I remember hearing my daughter screaming about saving her posters. I had to physically restrain her from running towards the building. Then she and my son both burst hysterically into tears. I needed to know if my husband had escaped the building, and thankfully, there he was on the sidewalk. Then I began to think of the neighbors. If anyone was home on the 3rd floor, chances weren't good. I pictured my 3rd floor neighbors who had just finished redecorating their unit, people who had just moved in a few months before. However, after that, I suddenly felt completely dumbfounded, as my brain could not function, could not comprehend. I had, right at that moment, absolutely no idea what to do next.
Here. And we'll probably splice it somewhere around here and bring that around, so we'll do that first. The new kerfing will replace the missing section that was burned away. Since it will, for the time being, be suspended across that section with no support of the sides or back, I'll need to stiffen it by rubbing glue into the slots, clamping it to the inside of the lower bout, and let it dry overnight. Next, I remove a section of the old kerfing on each side so that I have a place to glue the new kerfing into place. Before I glue the kerfing, I need to remove and replace the badly charred brace with a new one. Ah, that was easy. I clamp the rest of the brace in using a popsicle stick method. Next, I paint the brace and the curving with a little bit of trans-tint dye so it blends in a little better with its surroundings. Next, I made a piece of wood to replace what's missing from the side. It goes on top of the kerfing.
Some people from the Red Cross were at the scene, and one of them spoke to me and asked what my name was. I heard myself answer, but it was all so surreal. I remember asking if everyone got out. The workers affirmed that everyone had. At least that was a relief. Just then a fireman approached me with a smoking object, which turned out to be my acoustic guitar. Somehow, he had managed to rescue it from the flames, although there was now a large hole in the body of it. I wondered if you wanted this, the sweaty and sooty fireman offered as he held out the charred instrument to me. I thought you might want to save it. I hadn't had much hope for its survival, but after the instrument was cleaned up, it did sound as melodious as it had before. I still have it and play it to this day.
I should have made that piece just a little bit narrower. I forgot to provide for the ledge I need.
We were assured by the Red Cross volunteer that we would stay at the hotel in town for a few days. But when we entered the hotel room that night, I had a sudden realization. We were homeless. We all smelled burnt vinyl siding, and I felt asphyxiated because the room seemed cramped and stuffy. The walls were plain but predictable neutral shade, and the double bed was boxy and stark. A paradox of our colorful home. Oh, yes, I remembered. We have no home. I wanted to sleep in the park across the street. At least there was fresh air. The days that followed were a study in how to regain your life, how to start something from nothing. We had literally lost all of our possessions, including our pets, in the Holocaust that we had no renter's insurance. Pictures we had taken of our kids throughout their childhood were gone. Possessions that were reminders of 14 years of marriage. Gone. Gone with the strike of a match under the back porch. The hands of two careless little boys.
To cover that big gaping hole, I'm going to create a transparent window instead of a solid piece of wood. The idea here is to preserve the damage, not to hide it. I clamped a section of that resin to the other side of the guitar as a mold and let it sit overnight. You need some fine fitting. I placed tape to the inside of the window to prevent resin from dripping into the guitar and onto the inside of the window. A quick blast with the torch eliminates the bubbles. And we'll apply some black epoxy into this long, straight section. It'll take multiple coats of resin to level off this whole area.
But we still had each other. Looking back, I don't know how we would have done it without the Red Cross to help. They are an indispensable piece of a difficult puzzle. They were there to guide the way at each step, finding a new apartment, getting furniture, clothing, necessities, getting back to work, school, getting back to life. But yet, the tribulations of the fire were not over yet. We visited the fire site several times to look for our lost pets. 3 cats we had that shared our home, but we never saw them again. And once we were chased out by a policeman who was standing guard there, for what reason I am still not certain. Then I was contacted by the police department to have my son interrogated as to his whereabouts where the fire started. When we arrived at the police station, as a family, the sergeant accused my son of starting the fire, even though I had reported that he was with me at Hampton Beach all afternoon. I was enraged at the accusation, and the conversation quickly degraded. Now, far past the limit of my patience, I yelled at the interrogator as if he was a misbehaving child. How could my son be responsible for the fire when he was with me? Was he calling me a liar? At last the questioning stopped, and we were allowed to leave. A few days later, when the last spark of the fire was finally out, one of the firemen asked if I wanted to go into the burnt shell of our building to get anything out. This was a dangerous idea. As the building was so damaged, there were only 3 outer walls, were still standing, and 2 sides were in some places actually blowing in the breeze and no longer attached to anything. Somehow I felt safer, though, going in with 2 big, husky firemen to look for my possessions that were worth keeping. But I was not prepared for what I was about to see. Everything, everywhere I looked, was pitch black and dark as night, even though it was a bright day outside. No familiarity existed within the burnt walls of the place that I knew well as my home. It was frightening. I searched around the place, however, and managed to retrieve a handful of possessions. All of the music and videotapes that we owned were glued together from the intense heat of the fire, and so were all the photo albums and books in the bookcase. At one point, I found my wedding dress, covered with dirt and the blackest soot, and decided to leave it there. I symbolically draped it over the glassless window frame in front of the house. In the days and weeks that followed, I would often search for things we have used, only to remember that they were gone. Casualties of a moment in time. Favorite music, recordings, articles of clothing, kitchen utensils. It took a long time to replace all the financial things. Important paperwork, cards, account numbers, even our marriage license. Even after all these years, writing this still brings memories back to me as if it were yesterday. At some point, we find a way to put things back into the past and not ever to be forgotten, but to find the bright spots on an otherwise dark day. Without the efforts of truly caring volunteers, we would have had a much more difficult time. Asking for no money, these people often leave their warm beds in the middle of the night to give relief and courage to those who need it. and for that I am always grateful. Perhaps in a final effort to put it all behind, and maybe to say thank you in my own way, I joined the Red Cross disaster team in '97. As a fire survivor, I learned to be prepared, take nothing for granted, buy insurance in case of fire, and most importantly, to remember that people are the most important things.
It took several coats of resin to fill those voids. There were also some other little pits and stuff that I filled in. I'll be sanding most of it off and then spraying 2K on top of that, and I'll be sanding most of that off as well. A lot of sanding. I found the right size router bit for the binding, and although my router base prevents me from going all the way around, I can do the rest by hand. The binding is a little taller than the slot that I just routed, which is good. It will make a nice pocket for when I add the purfling into that slot. Be able to saturate it with some super glue and adhere them, all the layers, about 6 of them, all together. The wooden binding is thin enough and flexible enough that I won't need to heat it. It conforms quite nicely. I was able to insert the binding into a little pocket so that it goes just underneath the fingerboard there and has a nice clean appearance. I'll fill the remaining gap with a little bit of filler. And it'll look great. I used a little bit of ultra-thin super glue along the edge of the purfling. It'll soak right in, make it nice and stable. I used a cabinet scraper and a single edge razor to level everything out. So, as you can see, I'll also be doing some more sanding to the top after I filled in a bunch of little pockets and pinholes and low spots, etc. Final round of filling in any remaining gaps and voids with some resin. Next, it's time to do some wet sanding before we cover it with UK finish. And we'll do more sanding. Sanding, sanding, sanding. We're going to repair this puncture with some super glue and guess what? More resin. Sanding the binding after filling the voids caused a little bit of a light area there along that burnt section, I wanted to look burnt. So taped it off and touched it up with a little black dye before we cover it with 2K. I want the top binding to match the color of the binding on the rear. So I'm going to start with a little yellow so that the maple has the proper appearance, and then chase that with some medium brown on the walnut section of that. So a little more like the back binding. So in keeping with the original plan to keep the original damage intact as much as possible, I bought some new tuners and took the new parts and adapted them to fit the original roasty toasty knobs and tuner plate so that they would function normally as new tuners and still retain the original damage and charm. It's finally time to seal the deal and seal everything in with some 2K. Sprayed a couple of coats of 2K on this. Sides are pretty shiny. The top and back are a little orange peely. It's a functioning instrument. It's all one piece. But it's a tribute instrument to I'm struggling with the, I was hoping it would come out a little smoother, a little bit more like the sides here. It needs another coat on the front and back anyway. I think that's what I'm going to have to do. Well, we'll touch that little spot up. First time this thing, we'll see how it actually sounds. I had to put a lot of finish on it to level everything out. But the objective, it's a Yamaha model G235 classical guitar. And the whole objective was not to erase what happened, but to preserve what happened. And so if that's the objective, I think we achieved our goal. This little window here and window into the past. Let's tune it up. It's beautiful out here. Not a guitar anywhere in sight. We'll cast our line in, see what we get. Oh, beautiful. Oh, I got something. Whoa. Oh man, it's huge. Flip. Good.
Good enough.
Good to go.